This presentation is called Bitcoin 101, and it is presented to the American people on February 9th, 14, ABC. That's after Bitcoin. We're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about what is money, natural money, government money, and then math money, which is Bitcoin. After that, we're going to talk about FUD, which is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. First of all, what is money? Money is a measure of purchasing power, and good money is a durable measure of purchasing power. It's divisible, which allows it to be spent. You may acquire it, keep it, and send it. It is fungible, which means that its purchasing power is proportional to the amount you have. You may trust it, and other people may accept it as a measure of value, and that network value is proportional to the square of the number of users. So let's talk about natural money. Natural money usually includes gold and silver. They're good because we've been using them forever, but there's some problems with it. For example, the weights and purities are all over the place. You need a mint in order to make sure you standardize it. They're heavy, it's hard to keep, it's difficult to transport and send to people in large amounts, and it requires physical safety because it's vulnerable to theft and robbery. To solve some of these problems, people started to use government or bank money. Bank money or government money is typically standardized in weight and purity. They're usually lighter because they're printed from paper, and usually the bank or the government may be relied upon for physical security. So the problem with bank money or government money is that there's a counterparty risk. You never know when the government decides to violate its own laws or the bank decides to print more money than it has gold to cover. This leads to a system of overprinting and debt-based money. Money held by banks and governments are censorable, and they are subject to the jurisdiction by person and place. So let's talk about the green paper rectangle. A green paper rectangle is what you normally call a dollar, and a dollar is actually a Federal Reserve note. So what is a Federal Reserve note? A Federal Reserve note is a note issued by the Federal Reserve Private Central Bank for a debt of $1 on the credit of the United States. And note means a promise to pay, and we all know that promises may be broken. So what is this note a promise of? This note is a promise for $1, $1 issued on the credit of the United States. Therefore, the natural question is, what is a dollar? A dollar, according to the 1792 Coinage Act, means a measure of silver, gold, or even copper. A dollar is a measure of money. It's a measure of purchasing power. And much like a meter is a measure of distance, an hour is a measure of time, a kilogram is a measure of mass, etc. A dollar is not a thing. It is a unit of purchasing power for a thing. For example, you may say, give me $1 of eggs, or give me $1 of wheat, or give me $1 of gas. We use this term all the time. We have to learn to think about a dollar as a unit of purchasing power, not as a thing in of itself. So the next time someone asks you for a dollar, like the IRS, the natural response ought to be, a dollar? A dollar of what? Well, since the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 to 2020, a dollar has lost basically 97% of its value. Pretty soon, we're going to have a dollar of nothing. And that's because the Federal Reserve Act was an act to furnish an elastic currency. This would never have been allowed by the Founding Fathers, who recognized that if private banks were to control our money supply, they would deprive the nation of all property until the children will wake homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. This was the goal of the central bankers, which is that allow me to issue and control the money of a nation, then I care not who makes its laws. This is where we are. This is the root of all our problems, and this is the root of all evil. So now we have Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is mathematical money, and it's designed to solve the deficiencies and the counterparty risks of government money and natural money. Bitcoin is massless. It is guarded by cryptographic security. It does not allow double spending, which means the banks and the governments cannot engage in fractional reserve manipulation or money printing to steal your purchasing power. It is permissionless and censorship resistant, therefore not subject to any specific jurisdiction, and therefore may cross borders at will. Now we're going to discuss how Bitcoin works. We're going to talk about security, transparency, and the consensus mechanism. Security of Bitcoin is guarded by the security hash algorithm 256, which produces apparently random outputs which are totally unique and which the inverse of the function is very difficult to find. For example, if you input any data set, let's say the word liberty, into the SHA-256 algorithm, you'll get an output consisting of 256 zeros and ones. The importance of this hash algorithm is that these outputs are unique. For example, if you take the SHA-256 algorithm of the preamble to the Massachusetts Constitution, you'll get an output that looks like this. And if you take the same SHA-256 hash function of the preamble with a tiny change, for example, a period is exchanged for a comma, you get a completely different output. This makes the original dataset immutable, and it's extremely difficult or possibly impossible to corrupt. SHA-256 is designed as a mathematical trapdoor. The mathematical trapdoor allows a function to be created such that the inputs of the function are extremely difficult to find given a hash value. In this example, if I gave you a smoothie and asked you to find its inputs, it would be extremely difficult. The best you can do is to try out each of these ingredients in order to guess what the smoothie will taste like. It will take a lot of guesswork to accomplish. And this is the principle that underlies the proof of work consensus algorithm. In Bitcoin, the proof of work is to find a value such that the SHA-256 of all the data plus that value known as the proof of work will generate a new hash that begins with a lot of zeros. In this case, about 70 or more zeros. The more zeros that are required, the harder it is to guess this value, and therefore the more hashing power is necessary. That adjusts for the network hash rate. For example, at the beginning of Bitcoin, the hash rate was very low and computers such as GPUs were able to mine Bitcoin. But as the competition grew and adoption grew, the hash rate increased such that by today it's in excess of 280 exahashes. And an exahash is 10 to the 18th power. That's number of guesses per second. So as you can see, this is a huge amount of work spent on guessing the right proof of work value. Bitcoin is secured by the SHA-256 proof of work algorithm, including lots and lots of work. Next, we'll discuss Bitcoin transparent ledger. The Bitcoin distributed ledger is kept and published globally in order to record the transactions on the Bitcoin network. Any user may create or sign a transaction, and all the transactions are periodically confirmed by workers. Those are the computers that do the guessing. They're also known as miners. Here's what a blockchain looks like. First of all, you start with the previous hash. That links your block to everything in its history. Next, you have the signed transactions, which can include more than 2,000 individual transactions. Once this block is solved, the miner gets a reward, and this process keeps on going as long as there is someone mining the block. The block size used to be adjustable. Now it's limited to 1 megabyte, and that you'll see has great importance later on. Now let's talk about achieving consensus by proof of work. So the proof of work consensus is basically selecting the longest chain, which has the greatest amount of work inputted into it. This is represented by this middle chain here. However, it is possible for a defective or fraudulent miner to start producing blocks, but because they do not ordinarily control a majority of the hashing power, the other miners producing a valid and parallel chain will be chosen because they are the longest chain. However, if a fraction of the total hashing power is divided and produces a second chain, that's known as a hard fork, and that's what happened in 2017 with Bitcoin Cash. So Bitcoin is the record, and it is the Bitcoin blockchain. If you have a different blockchain, it will operate on a different consensus mechanism, and therefore you will get a different coin. So in essence, Bitcoin is a record of account. It is immutable, it's transparent, decentralized, and publicly maintained across the planet. It is cryptographically secured by SHA-256 and uses proof of work to achieve global consensus. It is trustless, permissionless, borderless, and network neutral to use or to mine. And its monetary policy is hard-coded, with coin distribution statistically based on the amount of guesswork done by each miner and limited to 21 million. So Bitcoin is a solution. It reduces or eliminates counterparty risk from banks and governments by preventing the centralization of monetary control and manipulation, fractional reserve banking, debasement, inflation, and ultimately the theft of the people's purchasing power by money printing. Additionally, it thwarts economic censorship and provides a public medium of exchange beyond the territorial and personal jurisdiction of banks and nation-states. Bitcoin is the greatest threat to central bank control since Andrew Jackson. But Bitcoin had a weakness. So in 2016 and 2017, it's my personal opinion that bankers mounted an existential attack on Bitcoin. They fomented division within the Bitcoin development community, which caused the exit and replacement of many of the original developers. To simplify things, as popularity and adoption grew, the 1 megabyte block limit began to reach its capacity, causing increasing transaction fees to skyrocket from pennies to several dollars or more. What would have been easily fixed by scaling the network on-chain by increasing the block size to 2 megabytes somehow got lost in the translation from Satoshi's original white paper, where he specifically indicated that fees were supposed to be low to include even free transactions at times. Thus, based on baseless propaganda, pretended concerns for security, and decentralization, the bankers and their paid developers were able to prevent the 1 megabyte block size from readjusting higher. This artificial limitation caused transactions to be slowed and payments to be delayed for hours or even days, making it impossible for merchants to accept Bitcoin as everyday peer-to-peer currency. On August 1st, 2017, Bitcoin Cash was created as a hard fork. From that time, the Bitcoin dominance dropped from the 80s and 90s to the low 40s, and it has never truly recovered since. It may be argued that Bitcoin has been dead since that time, as some people may claim. And there is some truth in that, because Bitcoin has become digital gold instead of the peer-to-peer currency that it was initially intended to be. Some people even call it a Veblen good. But the more optimistic view is that the attack on Bitcoin spawned a number of other coins with vastly superior privacy and scalability attributes. For example, Digital Cash Dash has instant transactions and may be anonymized, and Monero is fully anonymous. Whatever may happen to the value and use case for Bitcoin, it is safe to say that Bitcoin helped to initiate the beginning of a great new era, the era of separation of money and state. Here's a quote from Elon: "Freedom consists of the distribution of power and despotism in its centralization." We'll have to talk about fear, uncertainty, and doubt in a future video. Thank you for watching, and may the truth set us free.